I thought it's a pertinent time to start reflecting on some of the issues that the ACCRA signifies and what was presented by Joe, and also look at where we are in terms of bridging the gap between social protection, disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and sustainable livelihoods. And what I thought is that rather than you will be hearing a lot of other speeches from the senior officials who are representing various ministries. But I think we need to really introspect and look at, is this really working and where are the gaps? And I think nothing more is illustrative of this rather than the Horn of Africa crisis that has just happened. And you know that currently about 5 to 7 million people are facing, vulnerable people, poor people are facing these emergencies. And is it, I think there was a international summit recently in Kenya to bring these countries together, and people were asking the questions, is it climate change? Is it just a drought cycle? Is it insecurity and governance? Is it related to some of the other issues? Or are we sort of going to continue this periodic humanitarian intervention as the drought aggravates and as the CNN effect takes over? Means as you start beaming these pictures on the international televisions, or are we going to do something which is long-term, which builds resilience, which builds adaptive capacity for the communities here? And I think that's a question that you all need to look at, because you're representing countries which are vulnerable. The whole purpose of the ACCRA program, this alliance, is actually to start looking at that. And what I was thinking is, where are we failing? And I think the first thing that comes to my mind is the humanitarian communities of practice, the disaster risk reduction communities of practice, the sustainable livelihoods community of practice, and the climate change communities of perspective. Why are we not talking to each other? Now, this was illustrated when the minister spoke recently. You've got policies, strategies, but on the ground, are things changing for people who are vulnerable? People who are facing these emergencies, these shocks and stresses day in and day out. If it is not working for them, what are we really lacking? One is the communities of practice are not talking to each other. And it's very amply clear, if you look at the climate change communities of practice, they're talking about what is going to happen in 2030s and 2050s. That's what your climate change models tell you. It doesn't tell you what is happening tomorrow, today in the Horn of Africa. What is going to happen in the next 3 months in these regions. And that's what you need, is bringing that larger climate change, macro climate change information into information for communities, working with the meteorological departments and people, the pastoralists and the others whose livelihoods are very much dependent, sitting in climate sensitive sectors and working and livelihoods based on climate sensitive sectors. What does it mean for them? And that's a big gap, and we really need to address this gap rather than say, oh, climate change is all about climate variability and all. And this means that the climate change community of practice has to move down to the ground. Now, the other hand is the humanitarian community of practice. Now, of course, a disaster strikes and everyone rises. Emergency relief, this is how you know the Horn of Africa. We've been putting it in the last 50 years. Still, why are the communities not resilient enough? Why are the adaptive capacities not being built? Again, the two sides not talking to each other. So climate change, mainstreaming and integration of what it means for the communities on the ground not happening. And then, of course, the sustainable rural livelihoods communities of practice, which is actually dealing with issues day in and day out with those communities, not talking to each other. And when I say not talking to each other, this is not illustrated just of the government. Even organizations, international civil society organizations, research organizations, other development organizations, the two sides not talking to each other. This is the climate change advisor, this is the humanitarian advisor, this is the livelihoods advisor, not working in programs. Let's introspect ourselves why this is not happening. And that's an important issue, because if you really want to deal with this issue, we need to understand these quantities. This conference, I think, starts with a very positive note. You've got people from all the three core communities of practice. You've got ministers representing the local government, you have ministers representing the environment, representing the disaster risk reduction authorities. And I think you need to start looking at some of these issues, because the Horn of Africa does illustrate that things are not working on the ground. And that's where I would hope that programs like this, which are actually engaging in research. I was told that there's a adaptive capacity framework that is being developed. The UK government and DFID on its own has done a humanitarian emergency response review this year. And what we have looked at is why things are not working. And do our programs need to come together in terms of resilience? And in terms of resilience and adaptive capacity, we are saying it is much more beyond just saying climate change adaptation and climate variability, saying humanitarian work and emergency relief. It is about integrating adaptive capacity, building adaptive capacity and integrating resilience in whatever we do, which is programs, sectors, sub-sectors, and with communities down on the ground. And it needs to start with policy strategies, but then it needs to enter into the ground. And again, here in Kenya, you pick up the Vision 2020, 2030, it talks about drought cycle. You pick up the climate change response strategy, 2 years back, you look at sub-sectors within the programs, down towards the communities, the arid lands, there's hardly anything about climate change in there. So I think there is a gap there, and what I want is that this conference starts addressing some of these issues, whether it is through the resilience and the framework that you are talking about. I think the other aspect that I wanted to cover is it's about common challenges and common solutions in this area. Now, what we have seen is that a lot of the work that is happening around here, building knowledge, there are positive sides to things. For example, in the same Horn of Africa crisis, the response of government of Ethiopia and the way it has been dealing with things on the ground has been certainly very positive. It's certainly better than what Kenya has done. On the other hand, Somalia, of course, is a failed governance issue and an insecurity issue, and that's why things have may not have happened there to the extent that people really wanted. So I think there are positive things that are happening there, which is where people are trying to integrate safety nets, the disaster risk reduction, climate change and climate variability information for the communities who are actually sitting in climate sensitive sectors. It's all about developing resilient livelihoods and resilient communities through resilient infrastructure. And if you can really concentrate on that, let's not get too much into which framework you are working in, but ultimately on the ground, if you can save the lives of people who are most vulnerable sitting in those climate sensitive sectors, which is very much illustrative in this region of Africa and in the countries that you work with, then I think I would consider this conference as a success and the whole ACCRA. So what I look forward to as DFID from ACCRA is giving us the adaptive capacity framework, but also giving us examples and innovations of things working on the ground which actually lead to better lives and more resilient livelihoods for these people. Thank you very much.